The AP voters still have their horns up, ranking Texas despite a loss to Texas Tech and keeping FAU in the top 25. Should that be the case?
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey folks, welcome in to the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, the only daily national college hoop show out there, part of course of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are your co-hosts. I am Andy Patton. He is Isaac Shea. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more, folks. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 in your pocket if your team wins. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today to get started. We got a jam-packed show for y'all today. We're talking about the AP voters and some decisions they made towards the end of their top 25 that we have some questions about. We're going to talk about the Mountain West, which looks like it might not only have a couple of bids into the NCAA tournament, they got 5 legitimate teams that are vying for a spot in the Big Ten. So we'll talk about that. Some undefeated teams in conference play that are a little surprising. We'll close out the show, of course, with a preview of some excellent games taking place on Tuesday. Right. But today, since it is Trivia Tuesday, Isaac, we got a question for you. I'm going to read that for you right now. We will answer it at the end of the show. So Isaac, be thinking about this. Right now, KenPom, they have a 5-person all Big 12 team on the website like they do for every conference. And the Big 12 team is comprised of 5 players, but they're only on 2 different teams. Ooh. The question is which 2 teams are represented, and for a bonus, if you can name all 5 of the players on KenPom's all Big 12 teams so far this season. We will get to that to round out the show. But first, want to talk a little bit about the AP voters. I want to briefly mention Michigan State, a team that both of us considered ranking this week, but we did not. And fortunately, we did not because they ended up losing to Northwestern. Continues to be a struggle of a season for Tom Izzo and the Spartans. The rest of the poll, the AP poll and our poll for Locked On College Basketball looked pretty similar, particularly at the top. We're starting to kind of see that separation between the top teams and the middle of the pack. And you're kind of starting to see those polls not changing as much week in and week out. But there was a lot of change at the bottom of the poll. And in particular, some changes that we thought should have been made in the AP poll that were not made, namely the Longhorns of Texas still being ranked. We talked about it last week. I think we might have even talked about it 2 weeks ago of why this team is still being considered a top 25 team, and then FAU after suffering that loss to Charlotte. So Isaac, the first question to you, these 2 teams both still in the AP top 25, 24 for Texas, 25 for FAU. Which of these 2 teams are you more surprised is still ranked?
Ooh, great question, Andy. Frankly, neither of them should be ranked right now. I like both of these teams. And while happy wife, happy life is a thing, because my wife Maggie is a big Longhorns fan, still dealing with the disappointment of the college football playoff semifinal loss. Texas has no business being in the AP top 25. Andy, we have had them out of our poll for weeks now. I didn't go back and look, but it's probably been a month. Meanwhile, the AP voters continue to rank them week after interminably misunderstandable week after not getting it at all week. And surely, Andy, after losing at home to Texas Tech on Saturday, you and I and Leaf even texted about this, like, oh, finally the AP is going to get them out. No, Andy, the Longhorns are still sitting there. I don't think that FAU should be ranked either, but I am least surprised about that and more surprised about Texas. Andy, can I give you some numbers really quick about these Longhorns? They have an 11-3 record, and you look at that and you think, oh, that's not too shabby at all. There's some teams up at the top, Tennessee's 4th or 5th in the nation right now. They're 11-3. North Carolina, they're 7th. They're 11-3. But schedules and results and resumes are not made the same, Andy, because in those 11-3, Texas is 0-2 in quad 1, just 1-3 combined in quad 1 and 2. 9 of their 11 wins are quad 4 wins. Andy, Texas's best win is over a team in LSU that has some good name recognition, but is 83rd at KenPom. Texas only 3 of their 11 wins are top 200 at Ken Pom, and that's like 83rd, and then 2 outside the top 100. The Texas Longhorns have no business being ranked in the AP poll. Where are you at on this question?
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's really fascinating to compare the resumes between these two teams because Texas, again, like you said, they have 0 wins over anybody ranked in the top 75 and the top 82, frankly, whereas FAU, they have 6 wins over teams that are 76 or higher at Ken Pom as we're sitting right now. Six better wins than any of Texas's wins. That is an insane difference. However, 3 of FAU's 4 losses are outside the top 115 at Ken Pom. Texas, 0. In fact, Texas's worst loss per Ken Pom is that loss to Texas Tech. Texas Tech is 28th. So Texas doesn't have any good wins. They don't have any bad losses. FAU has good wins and bad losses. So the resumes are very kind of confusing to look at together. They're very different in a lot of ways, but the numbers, I think, speak for themselves. Texas is 60th in the net. FAU is 26th. Texas is 39th at Ken Pom. FAU is 22nd. FAU, I think, is a borderline top 25 team. I had them out. I don't think it's particularly egregious that they are still in the top 25. Texas, though, frankly, it is. They don't deserve to be there. They're playing Cincinnati on Tuesday night. We'll talk a little bit more about that game. But if they don't beat the Bearcats, at that point, it just looks even more ridiculous that they're still in the top 25.
And Andy, so, often you think, well, Texas will be okay as they get into Big 12 play. As you scan down their schedule at Ken Pom, they are favored in their final, how many more games will they have? 19 games of the regular season. They are favored in only 6 of them. Wow. So, Andy, this team, if I had to pick which of these 2 teams I would feel better about making the NCAA tournament right now, I got to say the Owls.
Yeah. We had a big talk about the Owls being a kind of a borderline team right now.
Yeah. And so that's saying something too. It's like the Owls are borderline team, but I still feel better about them going dancing when the team that hears their name called on Selection Sunday, which makes me even feel worse because I picked Texas as one of my Final Four teams preseason, Andy. So neither of these teams should be ranked. But I think, do you feel the same? Do you think Texas is the more surprising, or is it FAU for you?
Yeah, Texas. Yeah, FAU I think is justifiable to be ranked. They're not. I wouldn't rank them. I didn't rank them, but it's justified. Texas is not.
Okay, I love your point too. That it's just weird to look at because of the differences in the losses and wins. Check out their resumes yourself, folks. Okay, Andy, let's talk about the Mountain West because while we're talking about these 2 teams that are like, you look at the Mountain West, and buddy, I tell you what. A year after they make it to not only the Elite 8 for the first time, but the national championship game for the first time, the Mountain West is doing it. A couple of these teams we expected, Andy, San Diego State, first and foremost, and I would say Colorado State as well. We were high on them preseason. But not only is it San Diego State ranked right now, not only is it Colorado State, but it's also Utah State is ranked both in our poll and the AP poll. Nevada, we have ranked 25th, and they're just outside the top 25 in the AP poll. In the AP poll, they were 30th. They're in others receiving votes. And Andy, not only that, but New Mexico is also right in this conversation right now for making the NCAA tournament. That's 5 Mountain West teams. In fact, I checked Joe Lunardi's most recent bracketology. He has all 5 of these teams in himself. So, Andy, looking at the Mountain West, what do we make of this conference that's showing up really well again this season?
Yeah, all 5 of these teams deserve to be in that conversation for the NCAA tournament. And it's not they're beating up on bad teams. 4 of these 5 teams that we're talking about here are 500 or better in quad 1 games. New Mexico is the only team that is not. They are 0-2. They are, of course, the only team out of this group that is not ranked in our poll or in the AP voters' eyes. San Diego State's 2-2 in quad 1 games. Utah State is 2-0. Nevada is 2-0. Colorado State is 1-1. And then again, New Mexico 0-2. These teams, Isaac, are a combined 59-8. Absolutely ridiculous stuff from these 5 teams. They have all played fantastic schedules. They all have 13 or more wins. It's a fantastic conference. We're not even talking about Boise State, who is the clear sixth best team in this conference, despite being top 70 in the net right now and a very quality program in their own right. This is a really good conference. And I think if you're a mid-major conference or even a lower level Power 5 conference like the Pac-12 or even the ACC, you're sweating a little bit right now, because if this conference truly gets 5 teams in the dance, and it's hard to imagine it's less than that. It might be 4, but it is almost impossible to imagine it's less than 4 unless some team like Air Force and San Jose State start picking off these teams, which I just don't think is going to happen. The WCC's odds of being a one-bid league are really high, in part because of their struggles and in part because of this. The Pac-12 may not get more than 4 or 5 teams in the NCAA tournament because of the Mountain West. The A10, people are like, oh, maybe the A10 is finally a 2-bid league. I don't know if they're able to. If you think the AAC is going to get 2 in Memphis and FAU, which I think is the general consensus, and the WCC is probably only 1, the A10 is probably only 1, because you got to make room for the Mountain West to get these 5 teams in, because every one of them has a very obviously convincing resume. New Mexico is the only one. It's the only one. No quad 1 wins for them is definitely a bit of a problem. They have that loss to St. Mary's, but they have not been healthy this year. And when Jamal Mashburn Jr. and House are both back, Jalen House, that's a really good team right there. So to me, the Mountain West is a really dangerous conference. They have a lot of really tremendous talent, and other conferences are put on notice that they may not be getting as many bids as they want because of a conference like the Mountain West.
And the one kind of odd thing about it is there's not a ton of national respect, at least in terms of seeding. Andy, also looking at Lunardi's latest bracket, San Diego State has the best seed of these 5 teams, and it's a 6 seed. So we'll kind of keep tabs on this, but I love it. Great on the Mountain West. Way to go. All right, Andy, speaking of getting into conference play, as often happens as we're early in conference play, there are some surprising teams who are currently undefeated in conference play. We got to figure out of these who's legit and who's just taking advantage of a soft early conference schedule. We're going to have that conversation in just a second. Right after I tell you that this episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by Jace Medical. Look, I know we come to sports to escape from some of the crazy realities of life, but let's just talk for a minute about prepping for when real life actually shows up. According to the FDA, pharmacies are running out of antibiotics like amoxicillin right in the middle of the worst flu season in over a decade. I can't imagine a more helpless feeling than if someone I loved was getting sick while a supply chain issue was preventing them from being able to get the life-saving medication that they needed. Well, thankfully, there's Jace Medical. They have this thing called the Jace case, which is a pack of 5 different antibiotics to treat a long list of bacterial illnesses like UTIs, skin infections, and among other things. This could happen to any one of us. So visit jacemedical.com to complete your physician encounter. It will be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost. It's never been more important to be prepared than today. So go to jacemedical.com and use code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your order. That's Jace Medical. Here at the beginning of conference play, as we do every year, Andy, there are some teams that are off to hot starts that we didn't necessarily expect to do. Sometimes it's because they're just playing at a level we didn't expect. Sometimes it's just by fortune of what the scheduling for the conference is. So we want to take time to consider 4 of these teams in particular that right now are all at least 3-0 in their conference. Now, Andy, let's go ahead and say off the top, we're not dealing with the SEC or Big 12 right now because those conferences have only played 1 game each. We're also not dealing with the Big East because they don't have any undefeated teams. And then we're also not dealing with the Big 10. Their only undefeated team is Wisconsin, and we kind of expected them to be really good. Maybe the more surprising thing is that Purdue has a loss right now. Yep. That said, these 4 teams we're going to look at, 2 from the Pac-12, 2 from the ACC. Andy, let me name these off, and then I got a couple questions for you. So in the Pac-12, we got Oregon, who is 12-3 overall, 4-0 in conference. Their 4 wins are the LA schools and the Washington schools. Arizona State 10-5 overall, 4-0 in conference. Their wins are the Northern California schools and Utah and Colorado. Moving to the ACC, where we don't have the paired scheduling, so I got to list them all. We got Wake Forest, who right now is 11-3, 3-0 in ACC play, wins at home against Virginia Tech, on the road at Boston College, and then Miami over the weekend. Andy, big win there. And then NC State, who's 11-3 and 3-0 overall. 2 road wins at Boston College, at Notre Dame, and then blasted Virginia this weekend by 16. So, Andy, we got a couple questions we want to unpack here. Let's start with this one. Which of these 4 teams do you think will stay undefeated the longest?
That is a great question. I think looking at their upcoming schedule, I think it feels pretty likely that it might be the team that the team that I think is probably the best out of this group, and that's the Demon Deacons of Wake Forest. They got Florida State tonight, which is not going to be an easy game. It's on the road in Tallahassee. Florida State's been playing decent basketball as of late, but they're not a particularly great team. And they got Virginia after that, and Virginia is a tough game. It's always a tough game. Nobody likes to play Tony Bennett and the Cavs, but I think Wake Forest wins both those games, whereas I look at Oregon, they got Cal, which I think they take care of business there, but then they're on the road to those mountain schools at Colorado and Utah, and that's a really tough road trip. Those Pac-12 schools really hate going out to those elevation schools and playing them there, and I think that's going to be really tough. I think Arizona State and NC State are the weaker 2 teams in this group. Arizona State's they're on the road against UW. I'm not sure they're even going to win that game, and after that, they got UCLA and USC, which normally you'd think, well, there's no way, but this year those 2 teams are not good. Real opportunity for them potentially there. NC State, they got Carolina on the 10th. Tough game, rivalry game there, but I don't think they're going to beat the Tar Heels. So for me, I think it's probably most likely Wake Forest, and I think that they're probably also the best team in this group. They're close with Oregon in my mind.
I feel literally the exact same as you, Andy. Everything you just unpacked would have been all my same arguments. The only thing I'll add is that if Wake Forest can get past FSU and Virginia, then they're at NC State. So that's really interesting because we're talking about those 2. But then they host Louisville. So, they could reel off 4 in a row there, but then they are at North Carolina. So similar to NC State, got a date with the Tar Heels coming up. Andy, I mean, so whether it's Wake Forest or any of the other 3 teams that we didn't feel quite as strongly about, anybody you see as a real contender here, either for the Pac-12 crown or the ACC crown, or, maybe a top 4 seed in the conference tournament where you get some help there?
Not really. I think Oregon is the most likely to finish in the top 3 of their conference, and that's much more a product of the Pac-12 than it is anything else. Wake Forest is probably the better team, but to finish top 3, they'd have, Duke and North Carolina are at the top there. You'd have to, usurp Clemson, which is possible. You have to get past Miami, which they already beat them. Virginia, there's just more depth in that conference. Whereas for me, Oregon might honestly be the second best team in the Pac-12. And that says something about Oregon, but it also says something about Colorado, who's now playing without Tristan Da Silva and Cody Williams. Utah has fallen off a little bit. Obviously, we've spent a lot of airtime on USC and UCLA and their massive struggles this season. So to me, I think Oregon might actually be the second best team in the Pac-12, or they're at least in that conversation.
That's right.
Their loss, they got a blitzed badly by Syracuse, which was kind of a shocking result for them. Their other loss, they lost to Santa Clara. That was the loss right after N'Faly Dante and Nate Biddle went down with injuries, so they were really shorthanded in those games. For me, Oregon's a team that has adjusted to not having those 2 players and is 4-0 in the conference, playing good basketball right now, and they're going to get Dante back. He's going to be healthy eventually here, hopefully soon for that team. If he's back and at 100%, this team becomes even more dangerous. They're obviously not going to compete with Arizona. Arizona's the clear runaway best team in that conference, but I think there's a chance Oregon ends up being second or third in the Pac-12, whereas I don't feel as confident that Wake Forest can do that in the ACC, despite them maybe overall being an actually better team.
Okay, let's think end of the season. NCAA tournament. Let's rank these teams in most to least likely to make the NCAA tournament.
For me, Wake Forest is Oregon's most likely. I'm going to say Oregon's most likely because I think it's hard because Oregon has more opportunities to lose bad games. They could lose to, an Arizona State, which I don't think is a great loss. They could lose to, they got a lot of opportunities to lose bad games. Wake Forest does too. They got Louisville, Notre Dame, etc. It's kind of gets bad at the bottom of that conference, but I think Wake Forest is probably a little bit more likely to finish in the middle of the ACC, which just puts them in less of a confident spot. Whereas if Oregon's top 3, top 4 in the Pac-12, they probably get in, even though the Pac-12 is pretty weak. So I think Oregon's the most likely to make the big dance, followed by Wake Forest. Honestly, I guess I go NC State, followed by Arizona State after that, but I don't find either of those teams super compelling as potential NCAA tournament teams. Arizona State, I don't think they're going to make it. NC State is maybe a little bit more likely, but they're more of a bubble team than anything.
Andy, okay, real quick here. I'm looking at Lunardi's most recent bracket as you're talking about this. Mm-hmm. He's got Oregon in as a 12 seed. Mm-hmm. This has to be wrong. He's got them listed as the AQ right now over Arizona or Colorado or anybody.
But how doesn't he pick that just by like their conference record, or how does he pick that? Because
maybe so. I don't know.
Because otherwise that is ludicrous. Yeah, I don't know. Oregon's probably not going to beat Arizona for the automatic qualifier.
Okay, I'm hoping it's by conference record, because if not, woof, get out of here with that noise, Lunardi. I'm with you. I think it's Oregon and then Wake Forest. Arizona State, I don't see making it. NC State is, I'm going to call them a bubble team, but I wouldn't be surprised if they played their way off of that a little bit. But those Wake and Oregon, I feel pretty good about.
Yeah. It's a fun group of teams. It's kind of fun to look at these 4 teams here that are kind of in this position right now. Next week, who knows if any of them will still be there, but it's kind of fun to take a look at teams that start off conference season hot, because it's definitely it's definitely intriguing, at least as we get closer and closer to the bubble season in March Madness. Isaac, we got a phenomenal slate of games on Tuesday evening. We got some really fun games in the Big 12. BYU at Baylor. We also got a great opportunity for Iowa State to continue to prove themselves. We've been waiting to see if they're capable of doing it. They're hosting Houston. Can they knock off the only remaining undefeated team in the country? We're going to talk about those and a couple other matchups. But first, today's episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL regular season just wrapped up, but there is still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app is really easy to use, and there is a ton of different ways to bet. You can bet on point spreads, player props, money lines. You can also use their live same-game parlays. Plus, you can find bets in the new Explore tab and make a parlay in their Parlay Hub, the best way to find the popular parlays. Right now, Baylor is a 2.5-point favorite at home over BYU on Tuesday night. We're going to preview that game shortly and tell you what we think about that spread. So if you want to join us in on that action, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL. Well, Isaac, we got a fun slate of games, a couple Big 12 matchups that I think are going to be really exciting coming up on Tuesday night as we kind of transition out of the end of the college football season officially and get into full-time college hoops. I want to start in the Big 12 with Houston heading on the road to Ames to take on Iowa State. This game is at 7 p.m. Eastern time. It is on ESPN2. FanDuel right now does favor the Cougs, as you would expect, but only by 3.5 points. It is hard to win road games in the Big 12. And it feels to me like another good opportunity for Iowa State, a team that played close against Oklahoma and kind of proved that they do deserve to be, in the conversation as a top 25 team. The computers have continued to love them all season long. You think there's any chance here that they can maybe take down the last remaining undefeated team in the country?
Andy, I mean, if you're asking me chance, yes, 100%. If you're asking me, are they going to? No. Here's the thing. We've queried about Iowa State's resume, and it's very similar to what we said with Texas earlier. Their best win at KenPom is over 53rd Iowa. Everything else is outside the top 100. Mm-hmm. And so it's just that kind of thing where I just think Houston is going to take care of business here and keep that undefeated train choo-choo rolling, baby.
A couple more Big 12 games we got. With 3 of the 5 games we're going to talk about here are in the Big 12 conference. Not a real shock. It's obviously a really strong basketball conference. We got Texas going on the road to take on the Bearcats. of Cincinnati. Cincinnati already picked up a win over a ranked team against BYU last week on Saturday. Can they pick up another victory over a apparently ranked team in Texas? As we've already talked about, Cincinnati is favored by 4.5 points on FanDuel. This game is again at Cincinnati, 7 p.m. Eastern time, and it's on ESPN Plus. Isaac, you think this is the game that finally knocks Texas out of the AP poll, or do you think their Longhorns are going to go on the road and get a victory here?
Andy, I don't know why, and I know we've bashed on Tech. Really, we haven't bashed Texas. We've bashed the AP voters for getting this all wrong. But I feel good about this game for Texas, and I don't know why. I don't, which it shouldn't, because they're going halfway across the country to Cincinnati to take care of business. But I think this is a game where Texas is going to do enough to pick up this road win as underdogs. What about you? What do you think?
Yeah, I think it'll be a fun matchup to see kind of how the bigs play. I think it's a really big matchup for Aziz Bendago at Cincinnati. If he can protect the rim and handle guys like Dylan Dessou for Texas, I think that could be a tough matchup. But with Mitchell and Dessou and A. Smith, I think there's enough firepower that Texas could win this one. But I didn't think Cincinnati would beat BYU, and they did. So certainly the Bearcats team is not one to shrug off entirely. But I think the Cincinnati favored by 4.5 points feels like a pretty big spread in their favor. Certainly FanDuel, I would imagine, also agrees with us regarding where Texas is in the AP poll. But I think this is going to be a really fun matchup. And certainly, in my opinion, at least, whichever team wins is probably going to be in the AP top 25 next week. Because I think if Texas gets knocked off here, Cincinnati will and at least should climb into the top 25.
Yeah, that's good. Andy, we got one other Big 12 matchup we want to mention, and this is the only game on Tuesday night between two AP-ranked teams anyway. 21 BYU at 15 Baylor. No, those are our rankings. Forgive me. This is 9 Eastern on ESPN Plus. FanDuel has it Bears -2.5. Andy, it's in that brilliant new arena with smaller seating, which I'm a big fan and proponent of. We've never had these conversations, but I think this is what college basketball should be doing. Anyway, Baylor, as we know, we talked about on Monday's show, went to Stillwater, needed overtime to beat Oklahoma State, but beat them they did. Meanwhile, as we just mentioned, BYU lost to Cincinnati. Interesting stuff. BYU has had this hot start to the season. They have been, speaking of computer darlings, they've been another one there. So we'll see what happens. And Andy, I think both of these teams are at a spot where it's like, they need a win to kind of legitimize growing with where they're at. So Baylor -2.5. Andy, what do you have?
Baylor, and I think they're covering. I think they love that home arena. This is a tough matchup for BYU just in terms of roster construction. I think Baylor is going to be really hard for them to defend. I think the Bears win. I think they cover.
Love that. Andy, let's switch to our good boss's favorite team and the team he covers, Texas A&M at Zach Blackerby's 12th ranked Auburn Tigers War Eagle, baby. This game's 9 Eastern on ESPN 2. FanDuel has it by Auburn 8.5. Andy, when we were getting our notes ready, we both chortled with laughter at how big this line is. I did not expect it to be this big, but man, speaking of teams that were like, are their computer numbers legit? With what we saw from Auburn in Bud Walton Arena over the weekend, we're starting to think that maybe they are. We love us some Aiden Holloway. Can Auburn get another blowout?
Yeah, I mean, you go into Bud Walton Arena, you win by 30-plus points. It's hard to not have a big spread when you're then at home against an A&M team that has really struggled, particularly lately. The outside shooting hasn't been there. Wade Taylor has been good, but they're a little too overly reliant on him. I think Auburn's the better basketball team. I think they're going to show out. 8.5 feels like a big spread, but honestly, I think there's a good chance they cover this one as well.
Yeah, A&M is making me look silly right now for my preseason predictions, but whatever. Andy, let's quickly then move on to that Mountain West matchup you talked about earlier. The 20th ranked Colorado State Rams at Boise State, that weirdly shaped Idaho. I love it. 9 p.m. Eastern on the Mountain West Network, Andy, where we can all not watch it. FanDuel has this game, Colorado State, by 1.5. We talked about 5 Mountain West teams that are currently projected tournament teams. Boise State is just on the outside looking in. What could a win here do for their resume?
Yeah, it's a huge opportunity for Leon Rice's team. I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but over the last couple of years, the Boise State has lost like 1 or 2 games in January. Like, they're just a ridiculously good January team. I don't know if Leon Rice gets this team pumped up with New Year's resolutions or what exactly goes down in Boise, but this is a really good team. In Colorado State, I mean, they're coming off a loss to Utah State. They really don't want to lose 2 in a row. That's a big problem for them. If they do, they'll probably drop out of the top 25 with the last year to Boise State. And Boise State's, again, that 6th team, that team that's not really in that conversation right now, but they're a really good team. And if nothing else, they can absolutely play spoiler, and they got a great opportunity to do so on Tuesday night. You want to hear the trivia question?
Yes, I do.
You want to do some trivia
haven't been
stuff.
thinking about it, so I'm stressed.
So 5 all Big 12 players, according to KenPom. KenPom always readjusts the 5 best players in the conference, the all Big 12 picks. They're from 2 different schools. Tell me which 2 schools have all 5 players represented, and then let's see if you can guess who the 5 players are right now at KenPom.
Okay, quickly, my gut reaction is that it's Kansas and that it's Houston, but I'm like worried that it's a trick and maybe it's like Texas. Like, could it be Max Asmus? And no, Dessou hasn't been playing enough to limit. Like, I don't think it's Baylor, although they've got some dudes. I don't think it's Oklahoma. Okay, I'm saying Kansas and I'm saying Houston.
You're sticking with your gut. I love it. That is correct. Those are the 2 teams.
So the 5 players: Hunter Dickinson.
Yep.
Kevin McCullough.
Yep. You flip the order, but yes, those are the top 2.
Okay. LJ Cryer.
Yep.
Jamal Shed.
Yep.
And a fit. I can't decide which team. I don't think DeJuan Harris is. I'll just say DeJuan Harris because I'm not thinking of who else I'd want to say.
No, this is the trickiest part of this question, quite honestly.
All right.
Give it. You get the first 4. You want me to tell you?
Yeah, give it to me.
It is Emmanuel Sharp.
Oh, of course. Okay. Yep. Wow.
Yep. That was not expecting that.
No.
Over Jacoby Walter, over Ray J. Dennis, over Junior Nelson Jr., over anybody else in the Big 12 is an interesting observation there. But yeah, Houston and Kansas, not surprising that those are the top 2 teams right there.
Yeah, that makes sense. Good question, Andy. I love that one. I love Trivia Tuesday. I'm so glad we do this every week. Folks, thanks so much for joining us on today's episode. It's been great to be together. We'd love for you to come connect with us more deeply on the Locked On College Basketball Discord channel. The link for that is in the show notes. Speaking of in the show notes, we'd love for you to vote for us on the Podcast Sports Awards, where we are up for Best Basketball Podcast. So that link is in the show notes as well. Please don't forget to subscribe to us on audio and video, rate and review 5 stars, talk about why you love the show. If you're watching on YouTube, smash that like button so that we know you were here. As always, apologies to the lawyer family. Let's go Wildcats, and until tomorrow, peace.